We're 2 minutes after the hour. Let's go ahead and get started. So glad to have all of you here with us. So look, the theme for the next year with the councils and certainly the meetings in Omaha, it's culture, 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 culture. And I'll be introducing Doug Miller from DaVita in a moment, and he's going to talk to us today about culture. We will also have Katya Beauchamp, the co-founder and CEO of Birchbox, talking to us in February about conscious leadership and the culture they've created there. And then we will have the CEO, Karen Gurecki, CEO of one of the Berkshire Hathaway companies, will actually be our keynote in Omaha at the meetings in late April. And again, we're going to be focused on culture. And in fact, the key lessons to be learned from Buffett and Munger, and the reason we're taking you to Omaha this spring for one time only, is around culture. The key lessons to learn from them are not stock picking. Of course, they're good stock pickers, but it's more around culture and what Buffett and Munger call the web of deserved trust that they've built at Berkshire Hathaway. All right, so why have we invited Doug? Doug Miller is at DaVita, and he is responsible. He's part of the wisdom team there. He's responsible for helping to build a culture and community of shared values that translates into real success. They call it the DaVita Way, and talking about translating it into success, they've had a 50% jump in operating income year over year that they announced just yesterday in their third quarter earnings. Had a big jump in their stock. They're number 200 in the Fortune 500, and they've recently simplified their business to focus on the things that really matter to their customers. And look, everyone believes that culture is king, but few companies have the culture or the history proving its power. DaVita is one of those, as is Buffett's company, Berkshire. And in fact, Berkshire Hathaway owns 23% of DaVita, by the way. In the 1990s, however, DaVita almost went out of business until a new CEO came in and decided to focus primarily on the culture and the people. And with that new approach, he turned around the company, started this wisdom team, which Doug helps to run, and positioned the company to grow into the behemoth that is today. So Doug is senior director and master coach in what they call the School of Leadership at DaVita. And just so they're a provider of kidney care, dialysis services to patients in 2,700 outpatients dialysis centers in the US and abroad. They have about 200,000 patients and they employ about 60,000 people. He facilitates, Doug does, the leadership programs and coaches executives. He has degrees and certifications in business psychology and executive coaching. And just on the personal side, Doug's a music lover. His home is filled with music, courtesy of his community choir directing wife and teenage sons on sax and trumpet. And he's also based in Colorado, and he really cares about healing, transforming, and involving great cultures. So Doug, thanks for coming today to share with the councils a little bit about DaVita and especially about this wisdom team and what we could learn from what you guys have done there.
Thanks so much, Phil. Really appreciate the opportunity to share the DaVita story. And thank you for the introduction as well. Yeah. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. And
hey, Doug, as you're doing that, let me just remind people, as you're talking, Doug's going to talk for about 20 minutes. If you have questions, go ahead and post them in the Q&A section here of the Zoom interface. And then once Doug's done, we'll moderate a Q&A and I'll try to bring you guys live in with your questions. So go ahead, Doug.
Perfect. So love the title, Culture is King. And we really put a lot of intentionality here at DaVita into creating a culture of community. And I want to spend, I'm gonna go through some slides pretty quick just to orient us. Phil did a little bit of that already around what we do and what we're up to. This is a picture of a dialysis clinic. We have 2,700 of them around the country and a couple hundred internationally. And end-stage renal disease is not pretty. If you know someone that needs to sit in dialysis, my heart goes out to you. People sit in this chair for 3 hours, 3 times a week, and have their blood filtered, and are often very sick beyond just their kidney disease. There's often a lot of comorbidities. And so we take care of some of the sickest patients in the country. And as Phil was sharing, our story started back in the year 2000 when Kent joined the organization. And in the beginning, we were bankrupt. If shareholders had called in any of their, they were suing us. If any of the banks had called any of the loans, we would have gone out of, gone bankrupt. And you can read this list, tons of execs leaving and just a lot of demoralized, angry, and scared people. One of the stories that I heard that really brought this to life is that the CFO at the time had a drawer, and it reminded me of my college days. I've heard him tell this story of going into the drawer and making a phone call every day to our revenue operations team that collects the money to find out how much money had been collected, and then opened up his drawer to page through the bills and pick the bill he was going to pay that day. That's how bad the situation was. And it was an extraordinary move that Kent made when he joined the organization. He agreed to join the organization by posing the question to the board and saying, I'm willing to join the organization, but only if you allow me to focus on both fixing the culture and the performance at the same time. And so there was a lot of intentionality behind that, and he was not willing to do what happens a lot of times where performance gets the major part of the focus and then culture comes once the performance is there. So he had a lot of intentionality around that, and that's what we've been doing. So we've talked about 2,700 locations. We have a number of operations around the world. And we are, it's an interesting thing. If you read much into what's going on for us, we have lost money in our international operations for a number of years. But it is through our commitment of not wanting to grow and not put ourselves in a vulnerable state of being taken over by an international organization. So we've grown intentionally internationally in order to combat that and deal with that. A little bit, 70,000 teammates. This number shifted a little bit recently down to 60,000, I think, with the sale of DaVita Medical Group that happened recently. We're very proud of our clinical outcomes, and we focus on our clinical outcomes. These are some of the top clinical outcomes that are measured in the dialysis industry. And an interesting part of our culture is that we prioritize our clinical results, even to the point of it being the first thing talked about in with any of our shareholder meetings and things like that. So clinical outcomes gets the majority of our focus and is intentionally talked about first. Here's the climb in revenue since Kent showed up. Again, just building a little bit of credibility for the organization before I dive into the sweet spot of what I deal with, which is culture. And one of the things that's interesting is this underlying philosophy that we hold at DaVita, that we are a village first and a company second. And it's a fascinating way to think about and frame what we're about. In fact, it even says below DaVita on our headquarters wall, when you walk in the front door, it says, sometimes we'll say a community first and a company second, or a village first and a company second. And it says it right there on the wall, a community first and a company second. So there's a lot of intentionality in that we exist to take care of the community and the village. And that goes even to, we call our CEO at this point is Javier Rodriguez. We call him the mayor of our village. So that languaging has a lot of intentionality, and something that you can think about as you're working to build culture inside of your organizations is how are you using language to build culture, and how much intentionality are you bringing to what you're calling things and how you name things. So a lot of intensity and intentionality exists for us around that. And so we have a couple of guiding principles that we operate from. Again, you can think about what would be your guiding principles that would guide you in building your organizations and the culture within your organizations. So one of them, you can read this. This is not a dress rehearsal. This is your life. Begin with the end in mind and speak with your life, not just with your words. So these are principles. And then, you know, if you were to come take a tour of our building, you would see quotes like this alongside a lot of other quotes scattered throughout our building up on the walls, again, reinforcing these ideas and reinforcing these principles. So what would be guiding principles that would be guiding your organization? So
I'll just add something, Doug, you know, on that last principle, speak with your life, not just with your words. Ben Horowitz, who a number of people know, founding partner of Andreessen Horowitz, just put out his new book, which is titled "What You Do Is Who You Are: How to Create Your Business Culture." Same concept. Yeah.
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 And then to think about, you know, what are some of the underlying philosophies and you know, principles. We went out and did benchmarking very early on. We determined that we wanted to be extraordinary in our customer service and how we took care of our patients. And so we went out and studied some of the organizations that are known best for that: Disney, Ritz-Carlton, Southwest, et cetera. And we had executives go in and spend a month inside of each of those organizations studying and understanding it. And a couple of really big learnings for us. One was, you know, we were doing this so that we could then build our customer service program. And one thing that came back was unanimously, none of these organizations had a program for customer service. Every single one of them articulated some version of, it's the way we do things here. And when you really peeled back the layers of that onion, what we discovered and how we decided to put that into language is, it's what we believe in. And so we started to articulate, and this model exists across our organization. It's taught in every leadership program. If you were to walk up to any leader in the organization, they would be able to recite this model. And that is that our beliefs drive our behaviors, which create our results. So this is what gives us this underlying ability to really wrestle with things much deeper than just focusing on what's the behavior that's going to get me the result. We do go back and really look at the beliefs. And I could geek out and tell you about how human developmental science is proving this out, whether it's Keegan's work out of Harvard around immunity to change, or even dating back to some of the original work of Chris Argyris and single and double loop learning and all kinds of theoretical background, but in its simple kind of phrasing. And I think you can kind of catch a hold of the intuitiveness of this. Our beliefs drive our behaviors and create our results, which is one of the reasons that we focus here within DaVita, and we talk about leadership is a human skill and business is a management skill. And what we're really pointing out when we say that is that leadership, to be a great leader, takes the diligent, reflective work of wrestling with your beliefs and really analyzing and looking at how are those supporting you in being the leader and leading and driving the behaviors that you want. Which is also why in our leadership coursework and our leadership university, we say we're committed to your personal and professional development in that order, which is unique and different, right? Not many organizations are saying you will be a better mother, father, daughter, son, brother, community member if you come work for us. But that's what we're saying. We're saying you will be a better human being if you choose to go on this journey with us.
So Doug, that's really interesting, and I'm sure we'll have some questions on that. One of the things that I know people are thinking, I'm certainly thinking, is, one of the characteristics of language is you can use the same words to tell the truth as to lie with, right?
Yes.
And so you can use the same words to talk about culture and behaviors and put things up on walls. But a few companies seem to be able to actually operationalize that, and others just have it up in slogans that nobody actually really pays attention to. So how have you bridged that gap and actually built something that people actually, that a real culture as opposed to words on a piece of paper?
Yeah, so, you know, given the time that we have, I'm gonna skip right ahead to this slide. Here, let me go to it here. This is, in some ways, if you're looking for the codification of how have we driven culture,
Yeah.
we have intentionally embedded it into every place that we can find and that can make a difference. And so there's a lot that, you know, that our recruiting, how we recruit to culture. So every person that is hired into this organization is evaluated against our values and our culture, and is evaluated against, are they a mission and value fit? Our performance review process is also all all of our culture and mission and value work is embedded inside of that. And then this revere bubble is really all about, we have a phrase we say, a community produces most what it honors most. And so anytime there's a large number of teammates that are gathered, we will do what we call a night of honor, where we will honor those teammates that stand out in representing and living our core values. And we distinguish and separate that from performance. So you will get financially, rewarded for your performance, but you will get honored for your living of the core values. And there's these beautiful plaques that are given out. People are in tuxes and evening gowns, and it is an extraordinary honor to receive one of these core value awards. And then we, the rest of these you can kind of read and go around here. Reinforce it through our educational systems. We have people focused on their life alignment. So are they being an active community member? Are they, balancing their work and their life and aligning those things? And then the reality check there also is really pointed at, just like you or I would probably have a contorted view of our own kids and brag about them. Mm-hmm. This reality check is pointing towards, we go out and validate by participating and letting other organizations assess us and look at how are we doing. So we get honored and appreciated in a number of different ways and from a number of different organizations. So when you look at, how do you bring it to life so that it's not just words on a paper? Here are ways in which it's embedded into the system. The things that are not represented in here are things like, we have a communications team that is aimed at looking internally and how is culture brought to life by the pictures hanging on the walls, and all of the decor of our clinics and of our offices, we call them neighborhoods, there's a lot of intensity and intentionality, and that team lives inside of the wisdom team because we are so clear that internal decor is a driver of culture. The meeting planning team, we call them the village gatherings team, lives inside of the wisdom team because we know that anytime any large number of people are getting together, that is an opportunity to reinforce culture. So that team lives inside of the wisdom team, as does all of the audiovisual production and all that sort of stuff. So we've organized things. And the other interesting thing is that we sit separate and outside of the traditional HR function. And we have a chief wisdom officer reporting directly into the CEO. And he sits alongside of a chief people officer. So we've separated the HR function from the culture function with intentionality in order to keep culture pure and drive it. And one way I talk about it is, we're responsible in the wisdom team for the subjective experience of culture, and the people services, a traditional HR function, is responsible for all of the objective systems and processes. So it's an interesting dance and polarity that spins up there. So, and then another thing I would say that we use to drive culture is our symbols and traditions. And we have a number of symbols and traditions, and from whether it's the Three Musketeers, and what I want to say is each of these symbols and traditions organically was born out of something. It wasn't like someone sat in a room and came up with this idea, hey, we should have the Three Musketeers. It was born out of watching the Man in the Iron Mask and a group of people saying, hey, that's what I want inside of this organization. And one of those really pivotal symbols is we have a bridge, and there's this idea in terms of the bridge, and there's a physical bridge in every neighborhood, at every big meeting. And the idea behind the bridge is, you have an inescapable choice to make as a teammate here at DaVita. Are you going to cross that bridge as a symbol of your commitment to make this a special place or not? And if you're not, no problem, but this is probably not the place for you. We're never going to ask you if you cross the bridge. We're never going to force you across the bridge, but it is an inescapable choice that you have to make. So those are some of the different ways. I'm sure I've said a lot that has a lot of people thinking. Yeah, and it feels like a good time, Phil, right, to pivot to questions and thoughts.
And there is one question so far, and it's from someone that's anonymous. So for those of you who are asking, if you let me know your name, that's great. And if you're willing for me to have you come on and join us live. Back up for a moment and just tell us, you said a little bit about the difference between the wisdom team and the HR team, which is very interesting, culture and HR separated. But back up, what is the wisdom team exactly? What are you guys responsible for?
Yeah, so what lives inside of the wisdom team are a couple of lanes. One lane is the leadership and development team. So the DaVita University is one group that is in the wisdom lane. Another group is our internal branding and marketing, our wisdom creative services. So they're creating all of the decor, but they also, I like to jokingly say inside of DaVita, if you're a team and you don't have a unique name or a logo for your team, you probably don't exist. So that creative services team creates a ton of logos and helps naming things and branding initiatives that we have, et cetera. Okay. Then we have our village gatherings team, which is all of the meeting planning lane, which also includes our AV team, because so much of an experience created at a meeting is done through the audiovisual. And then we also have our corporate social responsibility team is in this lane as well, in the wisdom lane. Okay,
great. And then another question, and I encourage more questions to come through here, folks. As a chief coach, I guess, or a master coach, right?
Yep.
What exactly is your role, and what's a typical day in the life look like for you?
Yeah, so for me, my role is oriented around three different things. One is our core curriculum and teaching our core curriculum and coaching inside of our core curriculum at kind of the director level and above. The second role that I get engaged with is all of the ad hoc requests to come speak at a meeting, or I've got 50 teammates gathered, can you come facilitate or come do a team building? So all of the other work, leadership development and team building work that's done inside the organization is part of what I'm responsible for in coordinating that. And then the third thing, which is very interesting, that a leadership development executive coach guy inside of an organization would be at the tip of the spear coordinating all of the content for our large meetings. So I get engaged and help curate the meeting content, as well as supporting each of the individual presenters in their presentations and what they're going to be up to. And then there's all the other stuff that's just more extraneously oriented to supporting culture and, you know, spending time chatting with people.
Yeah. Okay, great. Now I'm going to call on a couple of people who have posted questions. And let's see. All right, so Summer, let's see, can I unmute you? Yeah, let's see, allowed to talk. Summer, are you there?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you for being here. Summer's at Target, Doug.
Oh,
and
awesome.
Helps run the innovation team there. Go ask your question, Summer.
Okay, so
yeah,
what I've noticed is for individual teams, I've seen the teams benefit tremendously when they go through the exercise of developing a purpose or vision statement and identify a set of team cultures and principles. And so I'm curious, does your wisdom team lean in to provide tools and facilitation for teams to do that kind of work too? Or at DaVita, do all teams just sort of follow the larger corporate culture and principles?
No, we do drive down into that team level. We are making a distinction when we get down into those intact teams between vision. So we want people, when they hear the word vision, to be thinking about our enterprise-wide vision. And so in order to keep that languaging clear for them, what we do is when we're working with intact teams, we talk about it in terms of a compelling purpose. And what is that team's compelling purpose as a way to distinguish it from the overarching vision of the organization. And then, yes, we do all that work in terms of helping them come up with that compelling purpose, and then all of the agreements that wrap around that, and all of that work.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
One of the things that Summer does, Doug, is she's an incredibly talented visual storyteller.
Oh, awesome.
Do you guys use any visual storytelling techniques inside DaVita as part of this?
We have had some of those visual story graphic creators come into some of our meetings and do that. And it's been incredibly powerful.
Yeah, cool. All right, thank you, Summer.
The other thing I would say around graphic storytelling is that we actually will, in our work, hand out a box of crayons and paper and get people to draw their own pictures as a way of representing and activating that more of themselves and engaging more of themselves in the work we do.
Yeah, cool. All right, so now I'm going to invite Craig Hopkins. Craig, are you with us?
I'm here, Phil.
All right, awesome. And so Craig is one of the company, he worked a long time at USAA, which is a company I'm guessing you guys might have benchmarked against. Had a number of roles there in strategies, customer experience, ran the digital team. Today he's the CIO for the city of San Antonio, which most people don't realize is the 7th largest city in the entire country. But we're not here to talk about that. Craig, you had a great question about character. Do you want to ask that of Doug?
Yeah, so in my time at a couple of different companies that have been very focused on culture and core values has always been the key part of that. I've learned over time that culture is actually the cumulative makeup of individual personal character and behaviors. So I guess my question to you is, how much of this is top down and how much of this is bottom up? Do you hire people who align to the purpose and vision and the culture that you want? Or does the work you're doing that you've taken us through actually make individual people's character better?
I would say probably it leans more towards the first, in terms of we are sifting for a particular culture fit when we are hiring. And that being said, once you are inside of this culture, like you'll sit in programs, we run about 5,000 people a year through one of our core programs. So you can imagine we're flying people all around the country into a 2-day program. So you can imagine the expense of this. And one of the activities that they do, and this is a vice president sitting right alongside a patient care technician and doing this work of sitting there and staring at a piece of paper where they're asked to articulate what's their credo for why are they here and what's their purpose and what are they up to in living this life. And so that is, in my opinion, a character developing activity. So if you're in the culture, you're gonna get called forward to analyze and work with your character. But I think we are working to sift for, in our selection, a particular type of person. And then the second thing I'll say is, like you said, is a top down. If it's clear to me sitting inside this organization that it organized itself around Kent theory, and that it was incredibly interesting, coming into this organization from other places where I, as a person in the middle of the organization, was trying to drive culture that wasn't necessarily completely aligned with the leaders' philosophies, versus being here and seeing the clarity with which a leader will drive culture, and then how the organization will organize itself around that. So inside of that, there's some tough decisions that need to get made when you have, like, one of the activities that we force leaders to do is to map their team. Are you a vision? We'll do a 2x2, and the vertical is, are you a mission value fit? And the horizontal is, are you, how's this teammate's performance? And looking at, if they are not a mission value fit, then they may not be, even if they're high performing but low on the mission value, they may not be a long-term investment and worth keeping around.
Yeah. Well, that goes right to the next question. Craig, did you have a follow-up, or can we keep rolling?
No, keep going. Thanks, Phil.
Okay, thank you, Craig. All right, so now I'm gonna bring in, let's see, Leonora. I don't know, Leonora, it doesn't look like you might be one of the callers, so I'm not sure if I can have you come in live, so I'll just read your question. So, oh, there you are. Okay, unmute. There we go. You there, Leonora?
I am.
Okay, great. So Doug, Leonora is SVP and Chief Operating Officer at Consumer Reports. And she's got a great question about that, sort of a follow-up to what you were just saying, I think. Leonora, why don't you go ahead and ask the question?
Yeah, before I ask, I just want to say thank you for this. It's fascinating, and I really appreciate the emphasis that you put around how language helps shape and reflect culture. So I find that fascinating. My question was, what do you do when a very high performer and someone that's very critical to the business demonstrates behavior that is not consistent with beliefs and principles? How do you handle that?
Yeah.
That, in some ways, for me, is where the rubber really hits the road, in terms of, are these just words on the wall, or are we truly going to live these core values and principles? And I think that the dicey thing in what you're saying is, at what point am I putting the organization at risk in terms of a performance dip in order to make a culture-based decision? And I think that that's the polarity that, that we live inside of and have to manage and have to understand. And also why it's just so critically important that there's a lot of rigor brought into both the recruiting process, but also, when you're promoting from within, brought to that level of process, and how are you evaluating people? So I don't have a really quick and easy answer for you. I think that that's the place.
Do you have a story? You don't have to share the name, but is there a story of a high performer that was let go because their beliefs were against the culture?
So yes. Yep. There's a way in which This is recorded and going to be made available. So
yeah, we're not talking names
we,
here.
we've had a change in leadership, right? And there are some decisions that I suspect, while no one's saying it, I'm suspectful that there are some decisions that have been made based on culture that previous leadership wasn't willing to make or didn't make, right? So, so I've definitely seen that happen.
Yeah. Leonora, you know, what do you think? Do you have more you want to ask on this?
No, I just also think that one of my principles is that, which is I'm borrowing from other people, and it sounds like you guys probably have this too, is that you aren't the worst of your behavior. You know, you shouldn't be judged by the worst of your behaviors alone, right? That you need, there needs to be room for growth and development and all of that. So I think you're right. It's really, that's the hardest thing, is threading that needle.
Yeah.
Yep. And one of the questions, if we're a community first and a company second, what would a community do? And there are times and places where as a community, we say your behavior is so out of alignment with our values that we are going to isolate you in a particular way or not allow you in. And so it's, you know, it's at the same time, there are places in which it's like you can feel everyone championing someone who wants to grow and develop, even though their behaviors are not aligned.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you, Leonora. It's a great question.
It is.
Yeah. All right, Elliot, I think this is Elliot Trice. Is that right, Elliot?
It is.
Okay. So Elliot's the head of design of IBM's digital growth and commerce business. Great question that you have about the history here, Elliot. Go ahead and ask it.
Yeah, my question's sort of related to Craig's question around how the culture shift sort of happened. So you described a bit of a deleterious environment in the beginning, and shifting the culture was probably a pretty significant event. I imagine there was probably a little bit of top-down activity, a little bit of extraction from the bottom up. Can you talk a little bit about the mechanics of how that change was affected?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll do my best. I was not here at that time, but I'll tell some stories that I've heard and see if it's responsive, Elliot. The first thing is Kent will, I've heard Kent tell a story many times that he has this great vision of what he's wanting to create. He's standing in front of all of his vice presidents that he's brought together, and you can just tell they are not bought in to the level and not bringing the level of excitement. And he actually tells stories of going up to his hotel room in tears, that it just doesn't feel like it's going to happen or feel like it's possible. And what started to emerge is that he started to articulate in the early days, and he would do a third, a third, a third. It's a great little speaking technique that you might use, where he would articulate in a room, there's a third of you that probably believe in this and are excited about it. There's a third of you that are probably on the fence and not sure yet and checking us out. And there are probably a third of you that think this is the craziest idea in the world. And by separating out and creating those thirds, I think he was more able to give the third that were excited permission to actually be excited and express that. And then give the middle third some opportunity to kind of lean in and check it out. There's a great story of our current CEO, Javier Rodriguez was here when Kent showed up. And he recorded in a podcast, a leadership podcast, which I'll share the link so that you all can get it, where he talks about the leadership authenticity. And inside of that podcast, he tells the story of being a non-believer and challenging Kent around, are you really for real? And is this really going to happen? So, so that's like a story, an anecdotal story. I think to be directly responsive to your question in terms of mechanics, the other choice that was made by Kent and early leaders is it was going to be a democratic, as much as possible, it was going to be a democratic process. So our core values were voted on and determined by the first gathering of our facility administrators, the managers of our clinics in Phoenix, Arizona is where they gathered. So they affectionately are now called the Phoenix Group. And they voted on our values, and they voted on the name of the organization in that meeting. And so there's, and that democracy has continued to be reinforced throughout the history of the organization, to the point of we were able to vote. We built this building that I'm sitting in. We were able to vote on the angle of the design of the roof. Like, what organization would give teammates the opportunity to vote on the angle of a roof of a building that they're building? Like, what? That's crazy. At the same time, it's controlled democracy. So I sit on a floor. Every one of the floors in this building has what we call a Zen room, like a room with couches, and it's an unreservable room where you can just go hang out and relax. So I got to vote on the decor of my Zen room for my floor, but it was controlled democracy because it was choosing and voting between the black Western theme or the dark brown Western themed. So, you know, I got to vote, but it was controlled. It wasn't like, you know, you were giving people free reign.
And there was a Zen room. I mean, in other words, a lot was put in place. I will share with you, by the way, and Elliot, I heard you kind of chuckle. I think it's interesting. The third is actually how most historians believe the colonists in the American colonies divided up during the Revolution. A third supported it, a third were on the fence, and a third were British loyalists, some of whom left for Canada. And, you know, it's very often the case in significant cultural change that you have that third kind of division. It's a great point. Cool. Elliot, is this helpful?
No, that's I actually had not heard the third division. I think that's actually quite useful. And I have to say the choice of Phoenix for that meeting was
brilliant,
was quite apropos.
You know, and it's one of those things where I bet that choice was completely made financially, and the meeting that can then be wrapped around it afterwards. And so that's what I encourage you to do. Like, there's a great story a leader tells that he took his team bowling, and, you know, this one woman just really was throwing gutter balls after gutter balls, even fell down. And then everyone rallied around her. She threw a strike and the whole team erupted. And he captured that moment and said, this right here, this is what I want for this team. And their name became the Strikers. Right? So it's how do you take things that are happening already and capture that and then build that into a symbol and a tradition that has this historical tale to it. Now everyone can tell that story of how we rallied around her, and right. So, you know, those are those moments that you got to capture. You can't curate or make those happen.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Elliot.
One more thing came to mind, Elliot. You can go into Harvard Business. I think I'm not sure if it's in the business school or Harvard Publishing. We, about 5 years ago, helped Denver Public Schools turn their culture around. We partnered with the superintendent, and Kent was intimately involved. And there was a case study written about that and how all of the different things that were done to replicate what we had done at DaVita inside of Denver Public Schools.
We're going to get a link to that and send it out to everybody.
Cool.
So Elliot, don't worry about trying to find that. We'll get that for you. That's great.
We appreciate it.
Yeah. All right, thank you, Elliot. And then Annette, I think you have a question. So let me bring you in here. Oops, hit the wrong one there. Let's see, there we go, Annette. And unmute. Okay, are you there, Annette? Can you hear me?
And can you hear me?
Yeah, you're a little faint.
Well, thank you so much for this. This has been great. I'm coming from previously from the advisory board company, which was purchased by United Healthcare, and the division or the corporate entity that I was in was Optum, and
they bought, yeah, they bought a part
right.
of the business, yeah.
Right. And so one of the things that was fascinating to me, United Health Group has a huge investment in culture and a lot of materials, and they have a strategy of acquisition, much like IBM has for years. And I think it's important for them to fold new acquisitions into the existing culture. But one of the things that I found was that the Optum culture, and specifically the culture of the org that we were in, was nothing like the United Healthcare culture. So everything that was printed and everything, the seminars and culture events that they flew people out to and spent days and repetitively over a year, were not consistent with the actual culture itself. And so I'm wondering about, like, how are you measuring the success of the culture? And how are you, is it based on just attrition? Is it based on employee feedback and surveys? Is it some combination of different metrics? And also, how do you make room for that culture to change and evolve and have different cultures in different divisions and departments and some nuance there?
Awesome questions. Thank you, Annette. So yes, you're bringing up ways. There is a way in which you could point to our employee engagement survey, our turnover numbers, and different metrics. And then there's a way in which that doesn't capture the true heart and feel of it.
Right.
And so yes, we do all those metrics, and we are proud of where we sit. And there are stories told of the statisticians telling us we couldn't actually have as many year-over-year improvements in our engagement surveys, and that we need to go back and statistically analyze that because it's not possible. Mm-hmm. On the other side, though, I would say that Kent specifically, we'll see if our new CEO does this, but I believe Kent walked around with 2 letters in his breast pocket at all times. One letter from a patient talking about the quality of care that they got and the difference that made in their life and the impact that not only had on them, but on their family and their community. And the second letter was a heartfelt written letter from a teammate talking about how DaVita, in some cases, there are people that actually say, DaVita saved my life. Mm-hmm. There's a beautiful story of a gentleman showing up on the second day of one of our programs, saying, and this was a frontline teammate, and showing up on the second day saying, I really took that education we had yesterday afternoon to heart around having tough conversations. And I went upstairs to my hotel room and I called my son, who I haven't talked to in 10 years. And it's those moments that are brought to life through those letters that are never going to get represented in a metric. And right. Kent had an amazing way of always having some of those stories at hand to really touch the heart and bring to life the spirit of what we're up to in terms of taking care of each other with the same intensity we take care of our patients, and taking care of our patients really well.
Wow, that's great.
Second part of your question, what do you do when the culture needs to change? Which also, Craig, is probably going to touch on your question here as well. We have had a recent, Kent has stepped down this year and Javier stepped up as CEO of the enterprise. And there are very interesting conversations happening around with Javier and his team around which parts of these culture do you deeply believe in, and that do you want to perpetuate and keep going? And are there any that don't have as much energy for you that you want to put on the shelf? Not that we're going to like get rid of it, but let's be honest, if it's on the shelf, it's going to kind of drift into the background. And so we are in an interesting arc with that. And so, so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But the fascinating thing is that when you take one of our most known cultural events is this program I talked about that we put 5,000 people through. When we show up to do a focus group around that program, people freak out. They're like, you're not taking that away, are you? You're not going to change it. You're not going to get rid of it. The level of energy and intensity that our leaders hold and our teammates hold around that's what makes us special, we can't let it go, is kind of how people feel about the culture as well.
Wow, it's great. I have to tell you, it's very emotional to hear what you're saying, and heart-filled. And I appreciate the way you answered that question about metrics. That of course metrics are important, and the stories are as well. And thank you, Annette and Craig. Sarah, I'm going to call on you now. Let's see, are you there?
Hi.
Hey, so this is Sarah Kasten. Sarah, it's always good to hear your voice. And Sarah is a VP of Organizational Effectiveness and Human Resources at Kaplan Test Prep. You want to go ahead and ask your question, Sarah?
Sure. Hi, Doug. It's nice to virtually meet you. My question was around if you have any experience or advice for companies, either via acquisition, partnership, et cetera, but are otherwise merging cultures. And I thought, even outside of just companies merging cultures, if you didn't have specific examples there, even of teams, that have joined and, been in different areas that have, joined and merged, and, how you kind of navigate, two positive, but two quite different cultures.
Yeah, it's a great question. And we, in the year 2005, it was, we merged, or we bought out Gambro's dialysis centers. And there was a big bump in the number of centers, and a lot of intensity brought to how are we going to bridge these two cultures and bring that together. And I think some of that started with a lot of intentionality and intensity at the personal level. And we did a series of workshops leaning lightly on William Bridges' transitions work. Very simple change model that there's an ending, a neutral zone, and a beginnings. And I think what goes wrong so many times when there's mergers happening is that the endings are not honored appropriately. And that there's not the ability for teams or for people to really like acknowledge, almost in a ritualistic way, acknowledge what they're going to have to let go of and what's going to change in order to move into that neutral zone. So we did quite a bit of work to support people in orienting themselves in that model, and then also orienting them around what do they have control of and what do they have influence of, and keep bringing them back to where those things that they have control over and those things that they don't, not to get worked up about the stuff they don't have as much control over. And then I think it is, they're tough, hard choices to make at leadership levels. And this goes back to that question earlier, because there are probably some leaders that are coming over in that merger that may not be in alignment with the culture. And so, those changes just need to be respectfully navigated but dealt with, right? Because the words will just become words on the wall if leaders that don't align with those words are, stay in the organization.
Yeah, I think there's, such a common, it's interesting about, honoring the ending. So that's a nugget I'm taking with me. Thank you.
Yeah.
But, there's such a sense of wanting to respect the culture that's coming in, or, depending upon what the situation is,
Yeah.
but I think it's a different point of view slightly to, hold true to yours, because if so, you're essentially diluting both.
Yeah.
So it might cause some turn and be uncomfortable at the beginning, but
There's a beautiful process for endings where you lay a bunch of pictures out and you let people pick a picture that represents how they feel about the change and hold it up and then put it up on the wall. And then you have everyone's picture on the wall. And then you just stand in front of it like you're at a memorial service and honor it. Not a lot to be said. A picture's worth 1,000 words, but this is how I feel about what's happening. And then rip those off the wall, throw them in an old ratty suitcase as a symbolic gesture that we're going to move forward. So that's like a ritual way of bringing something to a close or an end.
Do you have something written on that by chance, Doug?
I do. I'd be willing to share a little process that I have written up on that.
Great. We'll get that from you and out to everybody. All right. Well, we are now at 2 minutes before the hour. I want to end and honor this ending. Doug, thank you so much for taking your time, and everyone for being on the call today. As I said at the beginning, the theme for the year is culture, and obviously that will be a never-ending theme for many years to come, but we're going to really focus on it over the next year, starting today with this conversation, moving on to conversations with Katya Beauchamp of Birchbox, and then Karen Gorecki of one of the Berkshire Hathaway companies when we meet in Omaha. And we're going to do a lot more when we're in Omaha around culture as a theme for those meetings. So Doug, thanks for helping us kick this off and for being so generous with your time and for showing us an organization that really believes the words it says and doesn't just put them up on a wall, and has some methodology and some learnings that we can all benefit from. So really, thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for the
opportunity.
opportunity.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. And Doug, if you don't mind staying on for a quick debrief with me and Charlie, that'd be great. All right, everyone's